They thought vandalizing an old farmer's tractor in Harbor Point, Maine, would teach the community a lesson the iron wake motorcycle gang had terrorized the coastal region for months, destroying equipment and demanding protection money from struggling landowners to them. Marcus Sullivan was just another aging farmer to intimidate, but they had no idea they were threatening a man who had spent 30 years as the Atlantic coast's most legendary marine rescue specialist. A man whose harpoon skills had saved hundreds of lives in conditions that would make hardened sailors pray. Now, looking at his destroyed tractor in the misty dawn, the retired rescue expert was about to remind the Iron Wake why the sea breeds a different kind of warrior. This is the story of how one act of vandalism exposed a vast criminal network, brought down corrupt officials across 4 coastal counties, and showed everyone along the Atlantic shore that the deadliest predators aren't always the ones who roar the loudest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog rolled in thick off the Atlantic, shrouding error points, farmland in ghostly white, as Marcus Sullivan traced weathered fingers along on the deep gouges in his John Deere's engine block. Each point of damage told a story to his experienced eye. Fuel lines precisely severed, hydraulics strategically disabled, wiring methodically destroyed. This wasn't random vandalism. The destruction showed purpose, precision, the work of people who understood machinery. Bad business about your tractor, Mark. Tom McPherson's growly voice carried across the damp morning air. Marcus's neighbor of 23 years leaned against the barn door, concern etched on his salt-weathered face. 4th piece of equipment hid this month: Davidson's boat trailer last week, Chen's irrigation system before that. Marcus straightened his movements, fluid despite his 65 years. The motion carried the same grace that had made him legendary among rescue services, the economy of movement that let him hit targets with a rest resu harpoon in 30 feet. Sees pattern to it, he observed quietly. Always after someone refuses their dock fees. The Iron Wake had appeared 6 months ago, establishing themselves along the coast. What started as a simple motorcycle gang had evolved into something more organized, more dangerous. They demanded protection money disguised as dock and harbor fees, targeting both farmers and fishermen who worked the fertile stretch of coast that made Harbor Point unique. The crunch of gravel announced the arrival of a harbor patrol vehicle. Marcus's daughter, Rachel, stepped out, her lieutenant's badge catching the weak morning light. She'd gotten his call an hour ago, but her expression told him she already knew about the vandalism. Got 2 more reports this morning, she said, bypassing any greeting or trained eye. Photographed the damage from multiple angles, documenting each point of destruction. Iron Wakes expanding their territory. They're not just targeting farms and docks anymore. Marcus watched her work, noting how she learned evidence gathering thoroughly. Being the youngest lieutenant in Harbor Patrol history hadn't come easy, but she'd earned every step. Department doing anything he asked, though he already knew the answer. Rachel's jaw tightened. Chief Martinez says without direct evidence linking specific individuals, his hands are tied. Glams, they're just motorcycle enthusiasts with an interest in maritime business. Convenient, Marcus remarked, catching the flash of frustration in his daughter's eyes. The sound of motorcycles growled in the distance, growing louder. Dad, I know that. Look, Rachel warned, whatever you're thinking, just a farmer with a broken tractor. Marcus interrupted mildly, but his mind was already working, analyzing patterns, identifying pressure points. The same tactical assessment that had made him the go-to specialist for impossible marine rescues, the man they called when storms made conventional approaches suicide. 3 bikes appeared on the coastal road, slowing as they passed the farm's entrance. Their leather huts bore the Iron Wake patch. A skeletal helm man gripping a burning chain, the leader, a muscular man with a graying beard, rode point. His posture, the way he controlled his bike through the morning fog, suggested military experience. The 2 flanking riders maintained perfect spacing, scanning sight lines professionally, right on schedule. Rachel muttered, they always show up to admire their handiwork. Marcus studied the riders through narrowed eyes, the same careful observation that had led Him judged southeast conditions in the worst storms. The lead rider caught him watching and raised a mocking salute. Before gunning his engine, the bikes roared away, leaving exhaust hanging in the foggy air. That's Mike Undertow, Anderson Rachel, supplied ex-Navy. Dishonorable discharge, founded the Iron Wake 4 years ago, been moving up the coast establishing territory. Marcus nodded, pieces clicking into place, not just a protection racket. Is it we think they're using the farms and docks as distribution points for something bigger? Drugs, stolen goods, maybe both, but every time we get close to proof, evidence disappears, and Martinez keeps looking the other way. Tom cleared his throat. Town meeting tonight at Chen's restaurant. Lot of folks worried, trying to decide what to do. You should come. Mark, share your thoughts. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but his mind was already formulating strategies. The Iron Wake had chosen Harbor Point, carefully isolated coastal community, vulnerable targets, compromised law enforcement, a perfect setup for a criminal enterprise. But they'd made a crucial mistake. They hadn't bothered learning about the man whose tractor they destroyed, hadn't asked why a simple farmer moved with such precision, or why his eyes constantly scanned for tactical advantages, just like he'd done for 30 years on rescue operations. I'll be there, Marcus said finally. Might have some ideas worth sharing. As Tom drove away and Rachel reluctantly returned to patrol, Marcus began a careful inventory of his barn behind the farming tools and equipment. Lay cases he hadn't opened in years. Inside was gear that had nothing to do with agriculture, specialized marine rescue equipment, tactical Harpoon launchers, tools for calculating drift patterns and wind resistance in storm conditions. He'd chosen this quiet life, traded saving lives at sea for working the land, but the skills that had made him a legend in maritime rescue hadn't faded. The Iron Wake was about to learn that Harbor Point's farmers and fishermen weren't as defenseless as they appeared, and it had all started with a Vandalize tractor. Chen's restaurant hummed with tension as Harbor Point's farmers and fishermen gathered for the evening meeting. The usual aroma of seafood, chowder, and fresh-baked bread couldn't mask the anxiety that filled the air. Marcus Sullivan sat quietly in a corner booth, watching faces, reading body language, gathering intelligence, just as he'd done countless times during storm rescue operations. They're hitting the North Shore operations now, Samuel Chen said, the restaurant owner's normally steady hands trembling slightly as he gripped his coffee mug. Found my son's fishing boat with holes drilled in the hull last week. Professional, their work meant to sink it slowly. Insurance adjusters are calling it normal wear and tear. They getting worse down at the marina. Tom McPherson added, his weathered face grimacing. Iron Wake's demanding dock fees from everyone now, triple what the harbor authority charges, and if you don't pay. He left the threat unspoken, but everyone understood. Marcus noticed how several boat owners and farmers avoided eye contact at the mention of Chief Martinez. Fear, shame, maybe both. The Iron Wake's intimidation was working, breaking down community bonds one threat at a time. Harbor Point had always been unique, a place where farming met fishing, where people worked both land and sea. That diversity had made them strong. Now it was being used against them. Sarah, Ken Samuel's wife, appeared at Marcus's table with a fresh pot of coffee at 62. She ran the restaurant with the same fierce independence that had kept it thriving through 3 generations. Your girl Rachel was in earlier, she said quietly, topping off his cup. She's worried about you, Mark says. You got that same look you had during the perfect storm rescue of '97. Just considering options, Marcus replied mildly, like the options you considered when those harbor thieves tried setting up shop here in '89. Sarah's eyes held knowing humor. She was one of the few who remembered the younger Marcus Sullivan, fresh from the Coast Guard's elite rescue service, who hadn't stood idle while criminals threatened his new home. The restaurant's door chimed. Conversations died as 3 Iron Wake members swaggered in, led by Riptide Roberts. Undertow, second in command. Marcus recognized him from intelligence Rachel had shared. Former Navy SEAL, dishonorable discharge for excessive violence during boarding operations. Evening, no folks. Riptide called out, false cheerfulness dripping from his voice. Having ourselves a little community meeting. We're closed for a private event, Sarah said firmly, moving To block their path signs on the door, Riptide's smile didn't reach his eyes. Community meeting means community business. Iron Wake's part of this community. Now ain't we? His gaze swept the room, settling on farmers and fishermen who'd refused their protection racket. Been hearing some concerning rumors about people not appreciating our efforts to keep Harbor Point's waters safe. Marcus watched TI's companions take up tactical positions near the door. Professional spacing, clear fields of fire. These weren't common thugs playing at being tough. They were trained operators using their skills for criminal enterprise. Nothing to discuss here, Tom spoke up, though Marcus noted the tremor in his friend's voice. Just neighbors having coffee. See, that's where you're wrong. Riptide pulled up a chair, spinning it backward and straddling it. When we hear it, some folks been complaining to Harbor Patrol, making accusations that ain't. Neighborly motion at the door caught Marcus' attention. Rachel slipped in quietly, her uniform gleaming under the restaurant's lights. Riptide's men tensed, but didn't move to stop her. They couldn't openly confront law enforcement. Not yet. Everything okay here, Rachel asked, one hand resting casually near her sidearm. Just having a friendly chat with our neighbors, Riptide replied smoothly, sharing concerns about recent vandalism in the area. Shame about your dad's tractor. Dangerous times we're living in. Marcus saw Rachel's jaw tighten at the thinly veiled threat. She learned to control her reactions well, but he could read the anger in her stance. Speaking of vandalism, she said, voice professionally neutral, we've got some questions about a suspicious boat seen near Chen's fishing grounds last week. Am stopping by the station tomorrow. Riptide's smile turned predatory. Always happy to help law enforcement, though you might want to run that by Chief Martinez first. Wouldn't want to waste department resources on what did he call it, a routine maritime incidents. The threat hung in the air, clear as a lighthouse beam. The Iron Wake had Martinez in their pocket, and they wanted everyone to know it. Marcus cleared his throat softly. The simple sound somehow carried through the restaurant, drawing all eyes to his corner booth. Might want to reconsider your approach, son, he said quietly. Riptide turned, really seeing Marcus for the first time. Got something to say? Old-timer, just some friendly advice, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had guided rescue teams through the worst storms the Atlantic could summon. You're operating like military men, but you forgotten the first rule of maritime operations. That right? Riptide's amusement had an edge now. What's that? Never assume you're the safest predator in these waters. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Riptide's companions shifted uneasily, sensing something in Marcus's demeanor that their conscious minds couldn't quite process. Here was a farmer well past 60, and yet that a threat. Riptide demanded, standing so quickly his chair clattered backward. Observation, Marcus corrected mildly, like how you favor your left leg coming in. Old injury, probably from a boarding operation gone wrong, or how your men position themselves for maximum coverage. Stand seal tactics, if a bit obvious. Riptide's face went still. Predator recognizing predator. You've got some interesting knowledge for a farmer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats before Riptide forced a laugh, but there was a new wariness in his eyes, the look of a man reassessing a target. The Iron Wake members backed out professionally, never turning their backs completely as their motorcycles roared away into the foggy night. The restaurant erupted in worried conversation. Rachel approached her father's booth, concern wearing with admiration in her expression. Really antagonizing. Riptide wasn't exactly laying low. Those guys are dangerous, Dad. They put 3 fishermen in the hospital up in Portsmouth. Wasn't antagonizing, Marcus replied, his eyes still fixed on the door. Was gathering intelligence. His reaction confirmed 3 things. They've got military training, they've got Martinez compromised, and they're not used to being challenged on their own ground. They'll research you now, Rachel warned. Good. Marcus's eyes held a glint that took Rachel back to childhood memories of watching her father prepare for rescue missions he never quite explained. Let them find out exactly who they're dealing with. Might save us all some time. As the meeting broke up, Sarah settled into Marcus's booth. I remember when you first came to Harbor Point, Mark, running from the ghosts of those you couldn't save. You said looking for Peace, she patted his hand. Never quite managed that running part, did you, Marcus? Watched the worried farmers and fishermen filing out, saw the fear in their eyes, the growing desperation. Some things are worth fighting for. Outside, more motorcycles rumbled past the restaurant, the iron wake marking their territory, reminding everyone of their presence. But they'd made another crucial mistake tonight. They'd revealed their weaknesses to a man who'd spent his life learning how to read both people and see, knowing when a situation was about to turn deadly. The next morning dawned gray and threatening, perfect weather for what Marcus had planned. He stood at the end of his private dock, watching the iron wake's boats through his old rescue binoculars. 3 sleek vessels, far too expensive for a simple motorcycle club, patrolled the harbor entrance. Their movements showed military precision, professional seamanship. They're running something big through the harbor tonight, Rachel said, joining him on the dock. Her harbor patrol uniform was already damp from the morning mist. Got a tip about unmarked boats coming down from Canada, but Martinez has ordered us to stay clear of the North Channel. Marcus lowered his binoculars. That channel is treacherous in good weather. With a storm coming, he gestured to the darkening horizon where thunderheads were building. They'll need someone who knows these waters. They've got someone, Tom McPherson said, approaching along the shore. Just heard from my coos at the Harbor Authority. Iron Wake hired Kyle Stormy Stevens as their pilot. Ex-Coast Guard, used to run search and rescue out of Bar Harbor. Marcus's expression darkened. He knew Stevens by reputation, a skilled pilot who turned his talents to running illegal cargo after being discharged. He's good in a storm, but he doesn't know these local waters, not the way we do. The roar of approaching motorcycles cut through the salt air. This time it was Undertow himself leading the group, pulling up at the end of Marcus's dock. Like his men, he carried himself with military bearing, but there was something else, a calculated cruelty that his subordinates lacked. Sullivan, Undertow called out, removing his riding glasses. Been doing some research. Interesting background you've got. Most decorated rescue specialist in Coast Guard history. They still tell stories about some of your missions. His smile showed teeth. Long time ago, though. Now you're just a farmer with a broken tractor. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Those who can do, those who can't, turn to threatening old men. Under to smile vanish. Careful, old-timer accidents happen on farms. Equipment failures, chemical spills, fires. His gaze shifted to Rachel. Be a shame if something happened while your daughter was investigating. That sounded an awful lot like a threat, Rachel said coldly, her hand moving toward her sidearm. Just expressing concern for officer safety, Undertow replied. Speaking of which, Lieutenant Sullivan, Chief Martinez asked me to remind you about your new assignment starting tonight. You're on desk duty, administrative review. He called it. Rachel's face flushed with anger. That's not protocol. Reassignment requires times are changing in Harbor Point. Undertow cut her off. Smart people learn to change with them. Others. He left the threat hanging as he gunned his engine, leading his men back up the shore road. Got that, Bear? Marcus said quietly into his concealed radio. Once the bikes were gone, every word replied the growly voice of James Bear Hawkins, Marcus's former rescue teammate, who now ran a marine electronics shop in town. They're showing their hand getting sloppy. Another voice crackled through the radio. Miguel Chen, Samuel's son, whose boat had been vandalized, just intercepted some radio traffic. They're calling in more boats. Something big going down tonight. Storm or no storm, Marcus studied the darkening horizon. With an experienced eye, the approaching storm would ground Harbor Patrol's boats, give the Iron Wake perfect cover for whatever they were planning. But storms had been Marcus Sullivan's specialty. The conditions where his rescue skills had become legendary. They're planning something big, Rachel said, frustration clear in her voice. But with Martinez blocking me sometimes, Marcus replied, his eyes still on the horizon. You have to let the enemy think they're winning to get them to reveal their true position. He turned to Tom. Word to the harbor community, tonight's going to get interesting. The storm clouds grew darker as Harbor Point prepared for a confrontation unlike anything in its history. The Iron Wake thought they had every advantage: military training, superior equipment, corrupted officials. But they were about to learn why Marcus Sullivan's maritime rescue skills had become legendary, and why sometimes the deadliest force on the water isn't the one making the most noise. As the storm clouds gathered over Harbor Point Maris, Sullivan, and Rachel began piecing together the true scope of the Iron Wake's operations. The morning fog had burned away, replaced by the electric tension that preceded a major Atlantic storm. From his barn's newly established command center, Marcus studied the harbor. Charts spread across his workbench, marking patrol pattern and suspected drop points. Got something interesting from the Harbor Authority records, Rachel said, entering with a stack of documents. Her desk duty assignment had given her unexpected access to files normally kept from Harbor Patrol offices. Look at these shipping manifests from the past 6 months. Marcus examined the papers with the same meticulous attention he'd once given to rescue coordinates patent to the animal-heavy cargo movements during storms, when most boats should be docked. Exactly. Rachel spread out more documents. And look at the registration numbers for the Iron Wake's boats. They're listed as recreational craft, but the hull specifications tell a different story. They're military-grade patrol vessels, same type used for high-speed interdiction. The barn door opened, admitting Bear Hawkins, the former rescue swimmer's massive frame still carried the power that had made him legendary in maritime rescue. Circles got those sonar readings you wanted, Mark. He connected a laptop to display underwater topography of the harbor northern channel. They've been testing new routes, running patterns through areas that should be too shallow for their boats. Marcus studied the sonar data, his experience eye-catching details others might miss. They're not just running drugs or contraband. Look at these depth readings. They've modified the boat's hulls, added special stabilization systems. They're moving something that requires precise handling weapons. Rachel suggested maybe Marcus traced a route through the complex underwater terrain, but these modifications, the timing with storms, they're using weather conditions to cover specialized cargo operations, something that needs to stay at exact depths and temperatures. Bear's expression darkened like biological materials or chemical compounds. Before Marcus could respond, Miguel Chen burst into the barn, his face flushed from running. They just hit my father's restaurant, not vandalism this time. They're setting up equipment in the basement. Said it was for storage, but they're installing heavy-duty refrigeration units, special ventilation systems. The pieces started clicking into place. Rachel pulled up more harbor records on her laptop. Look at this pattern. Every business they're pressuring for protection money has specific characteristics: access to deep water, industrial power supplies, commercial refrigeration capacity. They're not just using Harbor Point for distribution. Marcus concluded they're setting up a processing network. The farms provide cover and store. The harbor gives them shipping access, and the fishing operations let them hide everything as normal maritime commerce. A new voice joined the conversation, Sarah Chen, carrying a tray of coffee into the barn. That's not all. Been hearing interesting things at the restaurant. Iron Wake's bringing in new people, ones with scientific backgrounds, calling them quality control specialists. Marcus's radio crackled with Tom Ferson's voice from his observation post near the harbor. Got movement on the water, 3 of their boats heading out. Despite the storm warnings, they're testing something in the heavy seas. Through his rescue binoculars, Marcus watched the Iron Wake vessels demonstrate sophisticated handling in the building waves. Their movements confirmed his suspicions. These weren't just smugglers or drug runners. They were running complex operations requiring military precision and specialized equipment. Rachel checked those manifests again. Look for patterns in power usage among the businesses they've taken over. His daughter quickly compiled the data. Huge spikes in electricity consumption, all coordinated with storm patterns when their boats are most active. And look at these supply orders: industrial chemicals, specialized filtration equipment, marine biochemical testing kits. They're using the whole community as one big processing facility. Bear growled. Farms for storage, harbor for transport, fishing operations for cover. Brilliant setup if you're running a sophisticated criminal enterprise. A sudden commotion outside drew their attention. Through the barn door, they watched an expensive SUV pull up to the Chen's restaurant. Chief Martinez stepped out, accompanied by men in expensive suits who carry themselves like federal agents, but something was off about their bearing. Those aren't real feds, Marcus said quietly, recognizing the subtle tells private security, probably cartel. Contractors Martinez is in deeper than we thought. Rachel's jaw tightened as she watched her boss conduct what appeared to be an official inspection. That's why he's been blocking our investigations. The Iron Wake isn't just a gang, they're an advanced team. Setting up infrastructure for something bigger. Question is, what are they processing? Bear asked. What kind of operation needs this level of sophistication? Marcus's expression was grim as he studied the harbor charts. Again, something that requires precise temperature control, specialized handling, and storm cover to hide the signatures. From satellites and coastal monitoring, something worth investing millions in infrastructure to process. And tonight's storm would give them perfect cover to bring in a major shipment, Rachel added, checking the weather radar. The harbor patrol's been ordered to dock all boats once the weather hits. No official eyes on the water. The implications hung heavy in the Barnes air. The Iron Wake hadn't chosen Harbor Point randomly, they'd selected it. Carefully isolated coastal community, corrupt officials, perfect maritime infrastructure for complex processing operations, but they'd made a crucial mistake in their planning. They hadn't bothered to research Marcus Sullivan's background thoroughly enough, hadn't asked why a decorated rescue specialist would choose this particular community for retirement. The storm clouds loomed darker as Marcus Sullivan transformed his barn into a tactical operations center. Nautical charts covered the wall, each marked with patrol routes, harbor depths, and tide patterns. But now they showed something else, a defensive network carefully plotted through harbor points. Complex maritime landscape. The Iron Wake thinks they understand these waters, Marcus explained to the gathered group of farmers and fishermen, but they're looking at it from a military perspective, thinking about patrol routes, surveillance positions, tactical advantages. They're missing what makes Harbor Point unique. Bear Hawkins nodded, understanding dawning in his weathered face. The local knowledge, the things you only learn from working these waters for generations. Exactly. Maris traced a line through the harbor's northern channel. Take this route they're using for their night runs. Looks perfect on charts. Deep water, minimal traffic, good cover from shore observers. But what's happening today's from now? Spring tide, Tom McPherson answered immediately. Combined with the storm, it'll create underwater currents that could tear the bottom out of any boat that doesn't know the exact approach. Marcus allowed himself a slight smile. Every local captain knew these waters held secrets that no chart could show. Generations of fishermen had passed down knowledge of hidden, treacherous currents and safe passages that seemed impossible to outsiders. They'd got military training, professional equipment, corrupt officials. Marcus continued, but we've got something they can't buy or intimidate. A community that knows every inch of these waters, every quirk of the weather, every hidden danger. And safe harbor. Rachel studied the charts with her investigators. We can use the storm to our advantage. Their boats are fast, well equipped, but they're designed for conventional operations. They won't expect traditional fishing techniques. Samuel Chen finished. The old methods our families have used for generations, ways of working with the storms instead of fighting them. Marcus moved to a locked cabinet, one he hadn't opened since retiring from rescue operations. Inside lay specialized equipment, rescue harpoons designed to attach guidelines in hurricane conditions, tactical sonar units that could map underwater terrain in zero visibility, communication gear that worked when normal radios failed. These waters have always been dangerous, he said, checking the familiar equipment, the kind of place where you survive by helping each other, by sharing knowledge. The Iron Wake thinks they can divide us, make us turn on each other. They don't understand what it means to be part of a maritime community. Sarah Chen arrived with fresh coffee and news from the restaurant, overheard their new quality control people talking. They're worried about tonight's storm. Their fancy equipment isn't designed for the conditions we're expecting. Good, Marcus replied. Bear, how's the old rescue network looking? Bear patted the sophisticated communication setup he'd installed. Got every fishing boat rigged with secure channels. They can't monitor our transmissions without local knowledge of how the signals bounce off the coastal geography. And I've modified some interesting toys from our rescue days. Marcus turned to Miguel Chen. Your father's refrigeration Equipment they took over. You've done what we discussed. Miguel's grin held a fierce pride. Modified the temperature controls, just like you showed me. They think they're getting consistent readings, but when the storm hits and the power fluctuates, their sensitive cargo won't have the stability they think it does. Rachel finished, and with Martins blocking official investigations, they won't expect us to turn their own precautions against them. Marcus confirmed. Tom, how are the harbor modifications coming? Every local captain's on board. Tom reported. We've adjusted the marker buoys by 6 and not enough to notice on charts, but in storm conditions, any boat following standard navigation will run into problems. Bear growled with satisfaction, and with the spring tide coming, Marcus surveyed the gathered community members, seeing determination replace fear in their eyes. The Iron Wake thinks they're fighting simple farmers and fishermen. Time to show them what a coastal community can do when we work together. Rachel checked the latest weather report on her laptop. Storms intensifying faster than predicted. They'll have to move their operation tonight or lose their weather window. Martinez has ordered all harbor patrol boats docked by sunset. Perfect. Marcus said they'll think they have free rein on the water. Sarah, make sure everyone knows their positions. Miguel, get the word out through the fishing fleet. Tom, signal the harbor crews tonight. We show them why these waters have always belonged to the people who truly understand them. As the group dispersed to their positions, Sarah lingered in the barn. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Mark, getting back in the game. Not enjoying, Marcus corrected, checking the mechanism on a specialized rescue harpoon. But sometimes you have to fight fire with water. They chose this ground, threatened our home tonight. They learn why that was their biggest mistake. Outside, the storm's leading edge began pushing waves against the shore. More Iron Wake boats appeared in the harbor, conducting what they thought were discreet equipment tests. They believed they were gathering intelligence. Instead, they were revealing their plans to people who'd spent lifetimes reading these waters. Rachel watched her father prepare the rescue gear with practiced precision. They'll have professionals on those boats. Dad, ex-military, experienced crews. True. Marcus agreed, his voice carrying the calm confidence that had steadied rescue teams through countless storms. But they fighting on our waters by our rules. Time to remind everyone why Harbor Point sailors have survived these seas for generations. The Iron Wake's command center, established in an abandoned fish processing plant overlooking Harbor Point's northern channel, hummed with sophisticated surveillance equipment. Undertow, Anderson studied the tactical displays, his weathered face illuminated by multiple screens showing harbor conditions, weather patterns, and security feeds. Former Coast Guard rescue specialist, he read aloud from the detailed background report on Marcus Sullivan, 30 years service, specialized in extreme condition operations and tactical harpoon deployment for vessel-to-vessel rescue in hurricane conditions. His eyes narrowed. How we missed this in our initial assessment. Sullivan kept it quiet. Riptide replied, pacing the room, his movements betraying growing tension. Retired without fanfare, became just another local farmer. But you saw him at the restaurant, the way he carries himself, the things he noticed. Man still got his edge. Undertow closed the laptop, his expression hardening. Could be a problem. Our clients are already concerned about delays. Tonight's shipment has to go smoothly. Want me to send a stronger message than the tractor? Riptide asked, unconsciously rubbing his left leg where an old boarding injury ached in the approaching storm. Not yet. Undertow moved to the wall of monitors displaying their operations blueprint across Harbor Point. Man with his background, direct confrontation is risky. We need to know more. He tapped a screen showing Rachel Sullivan in her harbor, a patrol uniform. Start with the daughter. Find out what she knows about Martinez's investigation across the harbor. Marcus Sullivan was conducting his own reconnaissance from the wheelhouse of his modified rescue boat, watching Iron Wake vessels escort unmarked ships toward their designated moorings through high-powered binoculars designed for storm conditions. He noted details that would escape most observers: specialized hand-handling characteristics, custom stabilization systems, professional crew movements, just like old times, isn't it? Bear's voice rumbled beside him as his former rescue teammate adjusted the boat's sophisticated sonar array. The equipment, disguised as standard fishing gear, was mapping every vessel's underwater profile, they're moving something big, Marcus observed, tracking another ESBO. Through his binoculars, weekly shipments based on tide patterns and storm forecasts, he lowered the glasses. Rachel says Martinez is blocking her investigation, trying to transfer her to permanent desk duty. Expected that Bear replied, making another adjustment to their surveillance equipment. Martinez's corruption goes deeper than protection money. The Iron Wake needed someone high ranking in law enforcement before they moved in. His expression darkened. They didn't turn him, he was already waiting for them. Noticed that too. Marcus indicated the approaching vessels. Those are custom-modified research ships, special containment systems, environmental controls, stabilization technology worth millions, way beyond a motorcycle gang's resources. The convoy disappeared into the gathering storm as Marcus' secure radio crackled a message from Miguel. Found something neat at the old Caner, urgent. 20 minutes later, they pulled into the abandoned Canaries loading dock, where Miguel Chen waited with Rachel, both looking grim. Tell them what you found, Rachel prompted. Miguel swallowed hard. Had a break-in at our processing plant last week. Didn't report it because nothing seemed missing, but yesterday I did inventory. He led them to a locked storage room. They took specific chemicals, industrial refrigerants, specialized preservatives, the kind used for delicate biological transport. They're not just running contraband, Rachel added urgently. The manifests the equipment they're installing these chemicals. They're setting up a sophisticated biological materials operation. Bear studied the inventory list with growing concern. This is just the start. They're establishing infrastructure. He looked at Marcus. What made you check here? Martinez kept pushing Harbor Patrol to investigate drug running around South Point. Rachel's jaw tightened, but it felt wrong. Too obvious misdirection. Marcus nodded. While everyone watches South Point, they're setting up their real operation. Here, the deep rumble of motorcycles approached the Caner. Through the grimy windows, they glimpsed Riptide, watching. No pretense of coincidence now. They're surveilling us, Rachel said quietly. Good. Marcus's voice held cold certainty. Let them watch, let them wonder what else we found. His eyes tracked the motorcycle's departure with the same precision he'd once used to calculate rescue trajectories in hurricane conditions. They'll move against us, Miguel worried, after what happened to our VDS. No, Marcus interrupted, his calm authority filling the room. Not yet. We've changed the equation. Now they have to wonder what we know, who we've told, what fail-safes we've set up. He turned to Bear. Remember that containment operation in '95, the one where we let them think we knew more than we did? Bear's eyes lit with understanding. The tanker crew running illegal cargo through the storm made them so worried about what we might know. They made mistakes. Marcus finished. Miguel, I need a list of every business they've pressured. Rachel, get me everything you have on Martinez's financials. Bear, time to call in those favors from our old rescue network. What are you planning? Rachel asked, recognizing the tactical focus in her father's eyes. They want to play sailors, Marcus replied, the approaching storm throwing shadows across his face. Let's show them what real mariners can do. They've been hunting us. Time to become the hunters. As they left the Caner, another motorcycle cruised past. Marcus watched it go, noting the rider's poor attempt at casual observation. The Iron Wake thought they were gathering intelligence, but they were really revealing their own patterns, their own vulnerabilities. They'd chosen Harbor Point because it seemed defenseless. Quiet farmers and fishermen, corrupt police, isolated location, perfect for their operation. But they'd made a critical error in judgment. They'd assumed Marcus Sullivan was just another aging sailor they could intimidate. Instead, they'd given a rescue veteran exactly what he needed: a reason to fight back and a clear view of their weaknesses. The war for Harbor Point was about to change dramatically, and the Iron Wake was about to learn why Marcus Sullivan's rescue operations had been legendary in maritime circles. Sometimes the deadliest predators are the ones that swim silently beneath the surface. Dawn painted the harbor blood red as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. 3 unmarked boats attempted to leave the Iron Wake's makeshift port facility, only to find their usual channel blocked by a massive fishing trawler, its nets mysteriously tangled in its own propeller. As the convoy diverted to their backup route, they encountered a Coast Guard safety inspection, But Marcus recognized every face on the inspection team, all former rescue specialists, who trained with him during the worst storms the Atlantic could summon. Mandatory safety check bear explained to the lead boat's captain, his smile not reaching his eyes. Storm warnings in effect might take a few hours to verify all your environmental compliance paperwork. Back at the Sullivan farm, Marcus watched the scene unfold through his tactical scope. Ride on schedule, he murmured as Rachel's harbor patrol vehicle pulled into the driveway. Martinez is furious, she reported, joining him at his observation post. Safety inspection permits filed perfectly, all legitimate. He can't stop the Coast Guard without raising serious questions. How's our friend Riptide handling it? Sarah allowed herself a slight smile. Watched him make 4 calls. He's rattled. They rely on precise timing for their shipments. Temperature control's critical for whatever they're moving. Control disruption, Marcus explained, using the same tone he'd used teaching rescue techniques to new Coast Guard teams. Make them doubt their security without giving them an obvious target. The crunch of expensive tires on gravel announced Chief Martinez's arrival. The police chief stepped out of his SUV, his uniform pressed to perfection, but his face twisted with barely controlled anger. Sullivan, Martinez's voice carried forced courtesy here. You've been taking an interest in maritime safety regulations. Good sailor keeps track of conditions, Marcus replied mildly, not lowering his scope. Never know when you might need to move sensitive cargo. Cut the act. Martinez moved closer, deliberately blocking Marcus's view. I know what you're doing. Your daughter's been poking around places she shouldn't, asking questions about things that don't concern her. Funny. Marcus finally lowered the scope, meeting Martinez's gaze. Thought investigating suspicious maritime activity was exactly her job. Last warning, Martin, as his voice dropped to a growl. Back off. Accidents happen on the water, equipment failures, navigation errors, sudden storms. Be a shame if something happened while your daughter was investigating. That sounded an awful lot like a threat. Chief Rachel's voice cut through the tension. She'd activated her body camera, recording every word. Martinez forced a laugh, just expressing concern for officer safety. Speaking of which, Lieutenant Sullivan, you're being reassigned to permanent shore duty effective immediately. That's not protocol. Rachel countered. Reassignment requires times are changing in Harbor Point. Martinez smiled coldly. Smart people learn to change with them. Marcus watched the police chief drive away, noting how Martinez used his radio immediately after leaving. Got that, Bear? Every word. Bear's voice crackled through Marcus's steed earpiece. Convoys getting antsy. Whatever's in those holes. They're worried about temperature stability. Rachel checked her phone. Our contact at the DEA confirms it. The chemicals they stole combined with certain temperature-sensitive compounds. She paused. Dead. They're not just running illegal cargo. No, Marcus concluded, studying the convoy through his scope. Again, Martinez's reassignment move means we're close to something, and they're showing there and getting sloppy. Bear added. The radio crackled again. One of Bear's men watching the convoy, sir. Riptide just made another call. Caught part of it. Something about accelerating the timeline and eliminating complications. Marcus's expression hardened. They're planning to move against us sooner than expected. He turned to Rachel. Get those DEA files somewhere safe. Bear, wrap up the inspection, but make sure our friends in the convoy know we took plenty of photos. What about Martinez? Rachel asked. He's exposed himself. Threats against a police officer, improper reassignment, suspicious timing with the convoy. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes you have to let the enemy think they're winning to get them to reveal their true position. Later that evening, Chen's restaurant hosted another meeting, but this time the atmosphere was different. Fishermen and farmers who've been afraid to speak up now shared information about suspicious activities they'd noticed. Bear's team compiled data, building a picture of the Iron Wake's operation. They're using the old Canary tunnels, Tom explained, pointing to a map connecting them to certain docks through new maintenance projects they forced on anyone paying protection. Perfect distribution network, Bear noted, hidden from satellite surveillance, easy to control access, and completely illegal. Rachel added, those tunnels aren't approved for maritime commerce. One anonymous tip to the Environmental Protection Agency. Not yet. Marcus cautioned we need to understand their whole operation first. Martinez has too many friends in regulatory agencies. We move too soon, they'll bury the evidence and start over somewhere else. The restaurant's door opened, admitting Miguel Chen, his face grim. Just got a call from my contact at the State Marine Patrol. 3 boats found adrift off Portsmouth, high-end research vessels. Crews missing something new in the water, they're saying extremely toxic. Marcus Sullivan stood at the command center he'd established in his barn, studying underwater topographical maps of Harbor Point's northern channel. The sonar readings Bear's team had gathered revealed something disturbing. The old Canary tunnels weren't just being used for storage, that they'd been extensively modified with new chambers carved into the bedrock beneath the waterline. Got the analysis back from those water samples, Rachel reported, entering with a thick folder the ones we collected near their main outflow and point. She spread the results across the workbench. High concentrations of chemicals used in biological preservation, specialized compounds for maintaining extreme temperature stability. But here the interesting part: traces of materials typically used in advanced genetic research. Bear examined the results with growing concern. These readings match what we're picking up from their boats. Whatever they're transporting needs precise temperature controls, specific pressure conditions. They're using the storm patterns to hide thermal signatures from satellite monitoring. Marcus traced a finger along the modified tunnel network. They're not just using these passages for moving cargo. Look at the chamber configurations, the ventilation systems they've installed. These are research facilities. Research for what? Rachel asked, though her expression suggested she already feared the answer before Marcus could respond. Their secure radio crackled with Miguel Chen's voice. Emergency at the docks. One of their containment systems just failed. You need to see this. 15 minutes later, they stood at the edge of Harbor Point's northern pier, watching hazmat teams deal with what the Iron Wake claimed was a minor refrigeration leak. But Marcus noted the professional precision of the response team. Their equipment far too sophisticated for a simple commercial fishing music operation. Those aren't standard hazmat suits, he observed quietly. Military biological containment gear. Watch their decontamination procedures. That's protocol for handling extremely dangerous materials. Rachel photographed the operation from a concealed position. They're trying to keep Harbor Patrol away, but I got close enough to see inside one of their monitoring stations the equipment they're using. Dad, it's like something out of a high-security research lab, because that's exactly what it is. Bear growled, studying readings from their modified sonar equipment. These tunnels